So power and a feeling of power is very important. So if power is one of your unacceptable emotions, you think you're a bad person if you're feeling it, well, you might be actually undermining yourself. You might be undermining your own sense of fulfillment.
Are you saying that disempowered people are not cheerful, Antonia?
I know, right?
I would have never guessed.
Shock.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So Jonathan on our team was telling us a story this week, Antonia. It was actually on one of our membership calls for our Personality Hacker Plus membership. He was telling a story about him and his son. And I thought it was a really interesting story that I will kick off today's conversation. He said that in their family, I guess his daughter needed to go somewhere and she needed a water bottle. And Jonathan has ENFJ preferences and he was trying to react quickly. So he saw a metal water bottle sitting near by the door and he just grabbed it, rinsed it out, filled with water, gave it to his daughter to take off site somewhere away from their home. I think it was an overnight or at least a long enough visit that this product, this resource is going to go away for a period of time. Well, I guess it was the actual water bottle was his son's water bottle. And so it goes off with his daughter, but his son finds out about this. And he suspects his son has TJ preferences, extroverted thinking or effectiveness preferences. And Jonathan has ENFJ preferences. So already they may not always understand each other. And Jonathan said that his son was frustrated by it, very frustrated by it. He allowed his son to express his full range of emotions directly to him, as long as he was respectful. And it was a long conversation. Jonathan said he got pretty heated. He's young. He's like 12, 13, somewhere in that range. Got pretty heated, but he's respectful. And I allowed that to happen. He's like, but that's new for me. That's really new for me. As an ENFJ with extroverted feeling or harmony, as a driver, Jonathan reported to us that normally I would think, oh no, there's a live wire of emotion in this room. It's like, if you snip an electric cord or electric wire on the high line, the high tension wires, that wire flying around is dangerous, right? There's electricity flying everywhere. It's chaotic. It's uncontrolled. It needs to be connected back to the circuit or it's going to start a fire or something bad's going to happen. He said, that's usually how I experience someone strong, like in a strong emotion in a room or something. I interpret that as an ENFJ, as, oh no, we have a problem. There's a live wire of emotion in here. We've got to do something about that. And he said, it's really a discipline for me to realize, no, this is something that my son needed to express in that moment. And it's work for him, growth for him to allow that to happen in the proper context. So that was a really interesting story because we were talking about it after the call, like after the thing ended, I'm like talking to him, like, I guess we all kind of do that in some way. Now, it's not just probably emotions, it's about all sorts of things, but we all probably have our acceptable and unacceptable ways that we think other people should be, not just extroverted feeling or harmony. Those are easy people to pick on because they might make it obvious, but I think all of us have these rules and the ways we want things to happen. So today we want to talk about emotions, I think specifically, because I think we do want to bring it into the realm of emotion. That's why I tell that story, because I think what is appropriate emotional expression? Like, I use this example again. I think I've said this a million times now in probably the last 6 months, but extroverted sensing or sensation, the favored process or modality of seeing the world for SPs, as an example. I always say it's unfortunately in our world right now, there's not a lot of room for unfettered expression of that, right? As long as you're playing a sport or you're on water skis or you're, doing something that's a specific application of that. But if you're just doing parkour or skateboarding randomly through a street or you're climbing a tree, oh, no, society doesn't like that. Let's shut that down. Mm-hmm. That's, again, an easy one to point to because we see it sometimes happening. But I bet this is happening all the time around us. And we're doing it to ourselves and we're doing it to others. I mean, you and I have talked right before we started recording. We also have some of these experiences as well.
Yes, I think that there's a bit of safetyism going on in a lot of different channels.
Sure.
Right. Like the idea of a live wire of emotion.
Yeah.
That feels unsafe. And actually the phrase unsafe has been co-opted to be put into a lot of different categories.
Comfortable.
Right.
I feel uncomfortable when they say unsafe. They really mean I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of conflation between those two things. I think people say they feel unsafe when they merely feel uncomfortable, for sure, like a lot.
Yeah.
But I also think that people have a lower threshold for what feels safe and unsafe because
Sure.
we have so much safetyism. We are so protected in so many different ways that I do think that there's a sense that if I allow this thing if I ride this ride, whatever it is, then something bad could happen and I'm not going to take the risk. No, there's a lot of problems with safetyism, lots and lots and lots. And I think it's being more documented now because we are feeling the effects of it more now than we have in the past. And safetyism is also like the enemy of, basically liberty, right? Because if we're at liberty to take actions, then there's risk involved. And so like what is the importance of risk? What is the importance of being willing to get outside your comfort zone? The smaller your comfort zone, the smaller your safety zone as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said in contemporary society. But that said, in the case of what you're talking about specifically with emotions and other people's emotions, what we were talking, you mentioned we had a conversation before the podcast. We were talking about what's acceptable and unacceptable within ourselves to ourselves.
Yeah.
As in, like, we might not feel safe experiencing certain emotions.
Yeah.
And we've had this conversation before because we've realized, and I started calling them unacceptable emotions. We realized that you and I both have an unacceptable emotion, meaning that there's an emotion I will do almost anything to not have to feel, and you have the same, but they're not the same emotion. My unacceptable emotion is different than your unacceptable emotion.
Yeah.
And we will do cartwheels to not have to feel that specific emotion for ourselves.
And our experience with others is also different too, right? Like I will, even if I don't want to feel it, I'll let somebody else feel it in my presence, but you won't want to feel it for yourself or let somebody else feel it in your presence.
Well, that's because I'm using extroverted feeling or harmony.
Yeah.
And so if they're feeling it on some level, I'm feeling it too. And I just don't like it.
Yeah.
Whereas you have introverted feeling or authenticity.
Or separation.
That's right. And you're like, oh, that's your feeling that you're feeling over there. And that's not mine. I don't have to feel it if I don't want to.
Yeah.
So you have a little bit more choice. Yeah. And so I tend to try to shut the emotion down if it's anywhere near me because I don't want to slurp it up. And so for me, an unacceptable emotion does end up creating a little bit of controlling the emotional environment.
Mm-hmm.
For you, you just don't want to feel it, so you just won't.
Yeah.
Right? And to be more specific,
before you say these, just if you're listening or watching right now, just tune into yourself right now. Do you think you have emotions, one or more emotions that you find unacceptable to feel either in yourself or others?
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of take a moment just to do a quick check, a quick diagnostic and see if you can come up with something. And then we can go ahead and state ours now, Antonia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wait, pause the podcast.
Well, I mean, you have the ability to
do
pause.
some thinking.
I'm just saying, like,
return.
Just imagine what you might think yours are right now. Go ahead and I just don't want to. I wanted to do that before we seeded these. Like, oh yeah, that one's mine too. Before you just grab onto it.
Sure.
Think if you can come up with your own, and now you might grab onto what Antonia's about to say.
Well, I have another bookend I want to throw in here too before I let. Apparently, what I had it out of the bag. I didn't even realize it was.
We're building up this pressure. Here we go.
That's right. It's so much anticipation now. The other thing is in the case of Jonathan with his son, he, like, you're talking about this live wire concept. It's like it feels like if somebody experiences that emotion, it's going to create a big problem. I think we tend to believe that these emotions are live wires within us too.
Yeah.
Like that we won't be able to control the outcome if we allow ourselves to feel these certain feelings. So as you're scanning to go, do I have unacceptable emotions? It's usually the one you fear the repercussions of the most, the one that you don't totally feel in control around. And then there's another thought that keeps coming in and out of the transom of my mind, and I'm trying to grab. Particularly for people who use introverted feeling or authenticity, so the FP types and the TJ types to a lesser degree, there might be a tendency to believe that there is no unacceptable emotion within a person who's using introverted feeling, but I've noticed that's not the case. I think you as an FP type, there are definitely unacceptable emotions. I've done coaching with certain, FP types, and they almost always have an unacceptable emotion. and it's very hidden from them.
Yeah.
Right. And something that you wouldn't know about yourself. So I think that there's some legs to this, no matter what your type is.
You can do work to unearth it though. Like Dr. Darinardi, our friend and colleague, talks about his unacceptable emotion. He's INTJ preferences. He has introverted feeling as a 10-year-old or tertiary. His unacceptable emotion is resentment. He's like anytime, and so he avoids like certain levels of conflict or friction because he's like, I don't want to get into the dynamic where there's a conflict. It's not the conflict I fear. It's my feelings after the conflict is resolved or not resolved, the resentment that will build. So the only way to never experience resentment is to nip it in the bud with conflict and make sure that I'm always either resolving or avoiding things in the early stages.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was it's probably very sophisticated for him in his 50s now to find that. I'm sure he didn't know that about himself maybe in his 20s, or it was less obvious when you're in your 20s potentially.
Well, and it's nice when you figured it out. So you have, like you said, protocols to ensure that you're cycling it through early so that you're not holding on to it. The challenge is when you don't have those protocols and you just simply won't feel that emotion. It doesn't mean the emotion doesn't exist inside of you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's not there. And if there is something that falls as an unacceptable emotion for us to, that we just leave unprocessed all the time, then it creates like plaque inside of us.
Yeah.
That whole concept of feelings buried alive, never die. It's like they're still there. We're just avoiding them. And now they're messing with us from the shadow because we just refuse to look at it. So I think it's a topic worthy of some self-inquiry to go, do I have one of those? Do I have some unprocessed material or content that is associated with an emotion that I just will do anything to not have to feel or process? So is it okay if are we at a point where I can say mine?
You got it. Go. Let's do it.
So for me, it's anxiousness. Right. I will not feel anxiety if I can get away with it. I hate the feeling of anxiety. So this has messed me up. So do I. No, you do not.
I cannot stand it. That's why I use it all the time to motivate myself, to close the loop so I can stop feeling this terrible emotion I hate.
Well, you might hate it, but it's not unacceptable for you. For me, it's unacceptable. I will do anything to not have to feel it.
That's a good distinction then. Unacceptability doesn't necessarily mean you hate it or you like it. It's one is your feelings toward it, and then the other one is what you will accept.
Yeah, it's like a stance.
So I hate it, but I will, to your point, I will accept it. You hate it and you won't accept it.
I do not accept it. I mean, like anger, I'm not a big fan of anger. Like I don't like feeling angry. Every time I feel angry, I'm like kind of disappointed in myself and I'm like frustrated that I felt it, but it's not unacceptable. I'll totally feel anger, but I don't like it. Sometimes I hate it. Sometimes I hate the feeling of anger. I don't like that it feels like it shuts my brain off. And so that's something I don't like, but I will allow myself to feel it. Not anxiety. I will do anything. And so what I have done is I have undermined the importance of anxiety. I have gotten myself into bad situations in avoidance of that feeling when anxiety could have been the right tool for the job. And I've also requested that you not feel it ever, if possible, which is hard for you as somebody who is an Enneagram 6.
It's so useful.
I know you find so much use.
Useful.
So I find that you, in our dynamic, it's also created some challenge because you're an Enneagram 6 and I have extroverted feeling or harmony as my 10-year-old or tertiary function. So that creates a recipe for you feeling anxiety and me slurping it up and then just being like off my nut, basically.
And not being able to think clearly. Really, that what you're avoiding ultimately is your thoughts getting hijacked. The tool you bring to the job is, how am I lying to myself? Introverted thinking, accuracy for an ENTP. How am I lying to myself? What's the actual clarity here? What am I actually looking at? And when the emotion's in there, it's really hard to see those things.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, so what's your unacceptable emotion?
I think mine's grief. I think I don't like grief, and it's not because I don't like feeling grief. I think it's because I feel like it will destroy my utility. If I'm spending time wallowing in grief, in fact, I'm realizing how much I code emotion into utility and usefulness. Like anxiety is extremely useful. You can motivate yourself. It's amazing motivation tool. Anger is very motivating. Fear, anxiety, man, does that motivate me personally. Other people, you're not motivated, but it shuts you down. But for me, I'm like, I hate feeling this. To get relief, I close loops, I get things done, I look ahead, I plan, I keep on it. I'm sure, like if I have a bill due in 2 weeks, well, the anxiousness of that deadline or a project due or something, the anxiousness of that deadline coming makes me get to work now. And the moment I remove that anxiety, that's when I get into the last minute deadline and I turn the paper in college last minute because I wasn't feeling anxious about it. So I've learned, man, if I want to have a successful life and make sure I get things done ahead of time, I need to feel the emotion that I will feel when it goes bad. Then I need to bring that emotion of badness and bring it forward and feel it now. So I can avoid the ultimate thing that will feel like when it collapses. I'll pre-feel the emotion now, and that fuels me for action. Grief, that's not going to fuel me for action. That's going to take me out of all the action. I'm going to actually have to go and process things. I can't get things done. Like I'm not going to be working on timelines at all. I'll be like wallowing in the past that nothing can be done about. So what's the point of feeling grief when I'm just going to wallow? I'm not actually accomplishing anything forward. I can't change the past anyway, right? And some of this is tied to my personality type, being an ENFP, ENFP preferences.
And an Enneagram 6.
And Enneagram 6. And I think that, introverted sensing or memory 3-year-old, and then my Enneagram 6, double whammy combo. So I almost always am coding emotion into motivation. Almost always.
Yeah.
At least I believe I am.
Yeah.
My conscious self is.
Yeah. That makes sense. Well, and that especially makes sense with having introverted feeling authenticity and extroverted thinking effectiveness so much more close to each other.
Yeah.
Right. Like they're as your co-pilot, auxiliary, or 10-year-old tertiary, as functions that you have both of them more accessible to you.
Yes.
It makes sense that emotions would be tied to usefulness and motivation and getting things done.
And what's interesting is my guess is that FJs right now listening, people that use harmony or extroverted feeling, probably feel very similar to me in the utility of emotion. We've noticed that a lot of extroverted feeling or harmony people believe emotion is actionable. Like if you're feeling an emotion, a distress emotion, like if I'm feeling a certain emotion around an extroverted feeling, like Jonathan, he feels like he's got to do something about that. He feels like it's not, I can't just express it strongly. It's like, oh no, there must be a response that's needed. Now he's worked on himself. He's very growth focused. So he's got mechanisms to stop this. But I think a lot of, extroverted feeling harmony users, as they move through the world, people are sending distress and emotion signals that feel overwhelming to them, especially like NFJs. I mean, all of them feel it this way, but NFJs and particularly INFJs report they can barely handle the amount of open loops and needs and emotion that needs to be handled now. It's like a big to-do list when they enter the world. Like, oh God, I've got all these things to do now because all these people feel bad. Something needs to be resolved. Some resolution and relief has to happen here for these folks.
Yeah, I think EFJs have a longer list. I think the IFJs feel a sense of responsibility, but they don't have the same compulsion to do something about it. So then it does feel like it goes unacknowledged or undone.
Yes.
But yeah, I think EFJs have actually the laundry list. And that makes sense. I mean, when you say the utility or usefulness of emotions, the utility and usefulness of emotions to extroverted feeling is that it's telegraphing needs.
It's looking for relief is the output.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I need to relieve this and resolve this.
Yep.
Whereas mine's an impact. Like I want my emotion to create something, an impact. And
yes,
extroverted feeling harmony can do this too. But in general, that's introverted feelings movement is I want to feel this emotion to motivate to get something done.
Yeah.
Whereas it's more responsive, I think, for the extroverted feeling. It's more like, oh, this is not doing well. Well, Jonathan calls it like an open loop. It's like, it feels like an open circuit, almost like electricity.
Yeah.
And you need to close the circuit again, and then it all calms down.
Because you're seeking equilibrium.
Yeah.
You're seeking like a general sense that everybody's okay. And then if there's any sort of distress signal in any way, like particularly emotional distress signal, but it can be other signals too, then the quote unquote usefulness of an emotion is to let you know whether or not everybody's all right.
Yeah.
And then what you're really seeking at that point is introverted thinking or accuracy. You're looking for the data of the situation. You're going like, well, somebody's not all right. So what's the data, right? Like what's the information that lets me know what is not going, like how's the system off? And so you get clarity and information on what's going on for the individual. And then now you can meet the need and now you're back in equilibrium.
Yeah.
And so slurping up that emotion that FJs do and TPs to a lesser extent in that way, slurping that up is actually, it's information that you're actually slurping up.
Yes.
It's experienced emotionally and in a feeling way, but it's actually data. It's like something's not okay. And here's the information of of how it's not okay.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you can pattern what to do about it. But to go back to, I don't know, did you have more
No,
that
I'm
you're going
good.
to say
Let's
about
go.
it?
We're good.
Okay, so I was going to go back to the point of origin, which is this idea of unacceptable emotions. And it makes sense that if we're like filled with a bunch of emotions inside of ourselves, or if we're slipping them up from other people, there would be ones that we like more than others. Because as you mentioned, it's type, to some extent it's type based. I think Enneagram comes in here even more than Myers-Briggs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so it's unsurprising that for you, anxiety is an acceptable emotion, but you do not like grief. Whereas grief, I'm an Enneagram 3, right? I'll do grief all day long. Like grief is my bread and butter. I feel I am attuned to my grief now. I had to become attuned to it. It took a while because 3s, like they're the ones that are trying to suppress the feeling and run away from it. But as soon as I realized that, I was like, no, this is actually a path of growth for me. I need to accept it. Grief is no problem for me whatsoever. But I do not like anxiety. And both of us are okay with mad or anger.
Yeah.
We'll both go to 9.
Yep.
All right. And the Enneagram, like 3 and 6s. And I also find it interesting that we partnered up with people who are basically like the Enneagram representation of our unacceptable emotion. I find that very fascinating.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Well, and I think to complicate this for me at least, like I can solve the problem of anxiety. Like there have been times in our lives when our businesses and things were running a little more smoothly and I had a little more space. I wasn't under so much pressure. I didn't have as many deadlines to have to run to. And removing those, the anxiety removes. It's not like I'm just always, I have a proclivity to connect to anxiety. Like I do tend to choose that as the tool first, but it can be solved through right action. So what, unfortunately, because if I actually do have less deadlines and less burden on me and more resource, and I'm not under so much stress, the anxiety goes away. I tell myself the lie that if only I can get all this done, then I won't have to feel this. And then I don't want to let the tool go. But if I remove those and I still felt anxiety no matter what I did in the external world, then I probably would be able to let anxiety go faster or like not want to pull on it. But when I use anxiety to actually close the loops, it does go away. So it's insidious and it's hard to get rid of now because it's not only do I think it's useful, it actually is useful. Right. But then you report to me, Antonia, you're like, well, I can't handle that.
Yeah.
Like I can't hang with you at that level of humming.
Yeah.
You got to find a different way.
Yeah.
It might be very useful. It might literally be the best tool for the job, but you and I aren't going to last through that. So figure it out, buddy, because it's not going to go much further than this. I'm done with this kind of level of intensity and anxiety because I refuse to feel this emotion. So then I ask, is that your problem or mine?
Right. It's a good question. Well, because anxiety strip mines my motivation.
Exactly.
Like it's almost like it feels like if I was well nourished, anxiety comes in and just demolishes me.
Yes.
If I feel anxious, I can feel it for a very small amount of time, but then I have to like recover from it for a while. And so, and I don't think it would be an issue if we didn't work together, right? Because we kind of do everything together. We work together, we parent together, like we're just around each other all the time. I don't know if most couples have to deal with as much, like your work. They don't have to deal with each other's work style as much. There are some couples that work together, and then the complex coordination of that is insane. If you're a couple right now, if you're listening and you're a couple that is working together and you're doing so successfully, hats off to you. The complex coordination of being in partnership, both in romantic relationship and also in career and how you make your living, man, those two things are very difficult to coordinate and to find a successful dance and to not have that content from one track enter into the other track.
Well, this is a little side note here. If a couple is listening or they're hoping to make that work, I think the principle is if it's just work, it's more challenging. When it weaves in and when we're in our vocation, what we're here, our purpose, what we're here to bring to the world, it alleviates a lot of that hassle. So purpose, because we have aligned purpose in vocation of what we want to bring forth, and we have different styles and different opinions about how we do that sometimes. That's just reconciling. But we're not just trying to make resource together. We're actually creating a vocation together, which also does put some other pressure on because maybe like the vocation, like, no, I think it should be this way. I think it should be this way. So I guess it's still complex coordination all the way through. Maybe that actually does make it harder. It's not just about making the money or making the thing happen. Yeah,
it's tough. And and at least for us, when we are having personal issues, it's very disruptive to our business life. Whereas before it'd be like, well, Now I'm going to go work to get away from my my relationship problems,
Yeah.
which is not uncommon, right? It's like,
Yeah.
why are you spending so many hours in the office? It's like, well, because I kind of don't want to come home because we're fighting a lot. And so it's tough because the personal stuff enters the business realm, and then the business stuff enters the personal realm.
Yep.
If we're fighting in the business, well, it's not like I'm totally cool with you right now because we had a fight today. So now I'm salty even in a personal realm. So creating really like cleaner categories, which is hard to do, and I'm not saying that they're going to be perfectly clean, but creating cleaner categories is necessary. But to go back to what we were talking about, which is if you're using anxiety to motivate yourself, and it's been this very useful tool, and I can't feel that, or I find it to be an unacceptable emotion, then whose problem is it? And I would say it's kind of both of ours, right? Because we're both in this dance and we've got to figure it out. But on one level, it's I think, and I'm glad that we're at this point in the conversation because I wanted to route it to this idea that there should be no unacceptable emotion, right? And it's a should statement, and shoulds are, they're not necessarily reality. So we'll most likely have an unacceptable emotion no matter what, whether we should or not.
Yeah.
But part of reconciling with whatever that emotion is for you is recognizing why it's important. And I don't just even mean its usefulness. Like, I don't mean it in an exploitative way where you can get a bunch of juice out of the squeeze. And that's why you want to feel that emotion. It's more like each one of these emotions that we have access to does something slightly different for us. And if we're using the tool appropriately, meaning that that's its job. Its job is to do that particular thing. If we're using it appropriately and another person in our life goes, I don't like that emotion, so you're not allowed to use it, and you're using it appropriately, then it is their problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's their problem. But if you're exploiting an emotion and you're using it inappropriately and it's causing problems for the people around you, well, then that's your problem. Or when we say problem, we actually mean responsibility.
Yes.
Right. Like, it's my responsibility if I'm exploiting a feeling or an emotion for my own ends and it's causing problems to others. But it's their responsibility if I'm using it appropriately and they just don't like it.
Yeah. I think I also want to inject here too, that when I talk to thinkers, and I've asked thinkers this in our coaching programs, our profile training, and these kinds of things, if they agree with this and they're like, yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. And I would even say some extroverted feeling harmony users, emotions are a problem to solve.
Mm.
I'm noticing a lot of thinkers think like, if I feel emotion, oh no, something's wrong. And now I've got an item on a to-do list of a problem I need to solve. And I'm like, no, you don't. Just feel just process the emotion. Just feel the emotion. That's not the emotion didn't just give you a problem. Like, emotions aren't problems. These are wonderful parts of ourselves. But I know that that's how a lot of people feel about them or process them.
Well, I think, and I probably do this too myself, but I think a lot of us use emotions as our check engine lights.
Yeah.
We use them as our, like if we're feeling an emotion, particularly one that doesn't feel good, we assume that there's a problem.
For me, it's just Tuesday.
Yeah. Well, and
I just love emotion. I mean, I like swim in it. I love it, but I'm wired that way.
And I'm so glad that you've taught me this idea of the separation of feelings or an emotion and a narrative or story, and how it's instinctive, maybe even compulsive for us when we feel an emotion to try to source it and to try to figure out what the whole narrative or story around that emotion is,
yeah,
what that feeling is. And you taught me that sometimes you just need to feel it, and the story or narrative is counterproductive. Like, it's like, well, I feel sad. Who or what made me sad? And I'm trying to source who's the terrible person that made me feel this way? Or what's the terrible situation that made me feel this way? And I'm looking for something to blame. And you've taught me, well, maybe you just need to process sadness. Maybe that's just what's going on. Maybe you don't need to have a story. And I've noticed that when I process the emotion first, either I didn't need a story. It just was an emotion, maybe a pressure or tension release, or it was associated with something that I'm not really 100% sure. Like, I don't have a full story around it. So sometimes there wasn't a story or narrative. Sometimes a story or narrative becomes much clearer after I process the emotion.
Yeah.
And it really didn't matter that much. It wasn't that big of a deal. And so when you say people tend to see it as a problem to solve, I think it's because we are almost always associating feelings and emotions with narratives and stories, and looking for problems or looking for the things that were the source, and being able to separate those two things out. I think I think it helps me understand there is usually a story,
Yeah.
but it's not necessary for the processing.
It goes the other way too. You can feel positive without having a story that leads you there.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel good just because you feel good. And because if you can separate these out, you don't need a narrative to feel an emotion. You don't need an emotion to feel a narrative. You can have them separate. Well, that means if something terrible is happening to you, like really bad, you can just decide to feel different and feel better. Now, that's easy for me to say because I'm wired that way with introverted feelings. So I have much more access to use that as a lever. But we all have access to introverted feeling at some level. Like all of us have access to all 8 of these cognitive functions. So it is accessible. Maybe it's not easily accessible, but it's nice because it's like, oh, wait, I have also the positive side of this too, or the optimistic side or the betterment side, not just the bad side of it.
Well, and let me interpret this for the non-introverted feeling or authenticity users. I think that if something terrible is happening to you and you feel good, that's like you can do that. Ooh, for a lot of us, that is a massively heavy lift.
Sure.
But the way that I would interpret that usefully for me as somebody who doesn't have that level of self-emotional keto, is I'm allowed to feel good just because.
Yeah.
Like I don't have to have specific thing in my life.
Yeah.
Where I don't have to have had like ice cream that day or whatever. Like I don't have to have like an amazing thing happen to me or a big romantic situation or whatever, like in order to
all the rules are gone. I don't need these things to happen to feel good. That's basically what, thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
No, I take it radical beyond that, but I think that's probably most accessible for most people.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, but you're also at a point where you're taking on heavier and heavier lifts with your introverted feeling or authenticity. And so that's like, for me, that's like somebody like lifting, bench pressing 300 pounds. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. You can do that. I don't know if I can do that, but that's amazing.
Yeah.
But it also helps me understand that I can bench press, a certain amount. Like I can pick up some weight. And so this idea that I don't have to have a justification or a rationalization to feel good, that's, for a lot of people, that's a game changer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to this idea of appropriate use of an emotion, right? Like like we mentioned before, if you're using the emotion appropriately and somebody else just doesn't like it, that's their problem. That's their responsibility to deal with it. If we are using our emotions inappropriately, like we're exploiting them, and people around us don't like it, well, then that's our problem and that's our responsibility. So I wanted to go to a resource called the Feel Wheel, and this is a resource that you can, if you look up on Google, just type in Feel, F-E-E-L, and Wheel, W-H-E-E-L, you'll get multiple different diagrams, but they all look relatively the same, very similar. They have a little bit different content in them depending upon who put it together. But I think the original one, I think that's the one that we're using as our source right now. It was made in like 1982. It has in the center, it has 6 different, what you could call maybe core emotions. And then splintering out from those 6 different core emotions are related emotions that sort of wrap around them. And then you have like a third layer of emotions that are outshoots of that center level of emotions as well.
Yeah.
I just mostly want to talk about the center of the Feel Wheel, but sometimes it's easy to reference different ways that center, that core emotion, also shows up in more, sort of more nuanced expressions.
Yeah.
But each one is important. And I want to go through and talk about why it's important and the appropriate use of it. And so, so if we hit upon one that is your unacceptable emotion, you, dear listener, if you have one of these that is unacceptable to you, then it's helpful to go, oh, that's why, even if it feels terrible, that's why I need to still have it in my life. I still need to process it in some way and not see it as something that I don't let myself or other people experience.
Yeah.
So the center of the feel wheel has 6 different core emotions. They are sadness, or I'll say them as they appear on the wheel. Sad, mad, scared, joyful, powerful, and peaceful. That's the center. And the offshoots of sad are things like bored, lonely, depressed, ashamed, guilty. Offshoots of that are things like jealous, bashful, miserable, inadequate, inferior, and even apathy ends up being an offshoot of sad. Madness has things associated with it like rage, anger, hostility, being critical. And offshoots of those are things like irritated, skeptical, furious, frustrated, selfish, right?
Yeah.
Scared is associated with things like helpless, submissive, insecure, anxious, rejected, and confused. And then an offshoot from that is like embarrassed, foolish, weak, insignificant, discouraged, and bewildered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joyful is associated with excited, sexy, energetic, playful, creative, and aware. And then the offshoot from that is daring, fascinating, stimulating, amused, extravagant, and delighted. For powerful, the associated emotions are faithful, important, hopeful, appreciated, respected, and proud. And some of the offshoots are cheerful, satisfied, valuable, worthwhile, intelligent, and confident.
Yeah.
And then finally, peaceful. So the core emotion is peaceful, and the related emotions are content, thoughtful, intimate, loving, trusting, nurturing. And the offshoot of that is pensive, relaxed, responsive, serene, sentimental, and thankful.
I have a little bit of an issue with this feeling wheel. I think it feels too categorical and too simple and basic. Of course, that would make sense why I feel that way. I'm always like, all right, I got a category. Like it feels too restrictive because we don't experience this way. We don't experience this clean categorical emotion. In fact, when we're in the emotion, that's the whole point of why we have to have a wheel, is it feels chaotic and messy. We often are not just feeling something simple like mad. We're feeling a complexity of other emotions too, maybe hurt and anxious and mad. And like it's got a bunch of these all coming together. But the one thing that did stand out to me, and I don't want to take us off in a different direction, but the one thing that did stand out to me is at the very center of this wheel, we're talking about states. We're actually not talking about emotions. We're talking about states of being, which are like the deeper core operating system of an emotion. And I realized that that's where a lot of us are operating from, and we have a tendency to be in a state, and we don't have a lot of state control, like the state that we're in, the kind of it's like the emotional or it's kind of like the emotional framework that we're approaching the world from. Some people, and I think we'd call that more temperament. Like I think it was the older use of temperament, not the types use of temperament, like SJ and SP temperament.
But you mean like choleric, and sanguine, and
but even broader than that, just like, oh, he's got an angry temperament. He's got a peaceful temperament, almost like a dog temperament, kind of like their attunement of their emotion. And I think when we talk about animals, we do talk about animal states. Like, and we even cluster certain animals, like, which the one is it pit bull that's always kind of like hurting people and it's a problem and there's always fights about it.
All the pit bull owners will be very, like, they'll
I'm not picking on pit bulls. I'm saying that's one that's a source of contention, right?
Yes, exactly.
People believe that pit bulls are in an angry state. They're just like angry and aggressive as a state of being.
I'm going to go ahead and represent the pit bull owner right now and say, but that's when you abuse them.
Sure.
That's when you raise them that way. But yes, there's
details don't matter.
In the zeitgeist, there has been a feeling about pit bulls this way.
So, and I'm just using it illustratively. The details don't matter. I have no beef against pit bulls. If you love pit bulls, please love pit bulls. That's cool. Somebody's got to, right? Needs to be have that represented in the world. Every personality is different. We need a pit bull personality. When we talk about dogs or animals, it's very easy to see this temperament state. We're very hesitant to do that to humans, right? Like to project that onto humans. But I think we show up to the world with kind of a state of being, right? And that's probably why we have unacceptable emotions too, is because it doesn't fit into the state that we want to approach the world with. Like I would say, Antonia, sadness is probably the state and it's really close to peaceful. And you said anger's okay. So you're probably somewhere in like peaceful, sad, and mad as you go into the world in the state of being, the emotional system that you bring to the world, kind of when you approach. Now you can access the others, but that's not your starting place. Your frame of reference as you enter the world every day is from that place.
Yeah.
I probably am entering it from scared and joyful on that side because I kind of oscillate between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of entering the world with a certain preloaded state of being, meaning that all the emotions in that state, kind of where it's focused, they're more accessible to me than they're going to be to you because I'm already looking at them.
Mm.
And same thing with you, or I'm already kind of like attuned to them in a way. It's almost like it's a way that like my emotional compass is pointed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really interesting. And a lot of introverted feeling work, or whether it's in a role that's like very utility, like acting, like an actor. Well, actors are masters at being able to move into the state they need to move into to express, right? That's actually what if an actor's good, they've got all sorts of methods and activities to do this, but ultimately what they're doing is they're getting masterful over state control, and they're controlling the state they show up to a scene or a situation in. So I'm realizing that some of this is not pre-wired, but we kind of go with we preload it. We kind of enter into a state of being, and it kind of sets the tone for how we're going to experience reality.
Yeah, I agree with that. So 2 things as you were talking. The first one is I completely understand why you would take umbrage with this.
Yeah.
I would I like to see it as a little bit of emotional cartography, just like a little bit of a map. And all maps are inaccurate, but some maps are useful.
Sure.
Right. And so I think this helps me because I'm not paying attention to emotions or the complexity of them, like within myself. I'm just feeling something suddenly.
Yes.
This helps me understand what the root source might be of some of the feelings I have and why I'm feeling what I am. It gives me more emotional literacy, basically. And so I don't know if I don't think that this is comprehensive and complete.
No, it's not.
But I think it's like it actually more for me seeds an idea that I find very useful and helpful. So it's kind of like though, anytime something's in your wheelhouse, and it's in your sandbox, but it's like kind of oversimplified for other people's use, it's always like that's not how it works.
Sure.
Like, yeah, it does it, but it's still helpful. So I wanted to give a nod to you because I'm sure other people who use introverted feeling or authenticity probably feel similarly.
What's the second thing you want to say? Because I don't want to interrupt that before I want to answer what you just said. You said there were 2 things. Did you say both of them?
I didn't say the second one, but go ahead and answer
it.
I can still tag it.
So that's why I brought the state idea into. Is because if I think of it that way, and if you're introverted feeling and you're thinking about this like, it seems too basic, like now that actually does make this thing make sense. Because when we talk about unacceptable emotions,
right?
Well, why would somebody have an unacceptable emotion? Like they should all be on the table. Well, not if we go into the world with a preloaded state.
Right.
If we do that, then this now makes tons of sense. So, and if we look at the middle of that and I go, that's really overgeneralized, sad. That's not really, like, no one feels sad. They feel a complex emotional cocktail of a bunch of emotions that are under the category of sad and under a bunch of other categories. So that's, it's not just one thing. So it seems oversimplified, but not if I'm saying it from how we're proactively entering the world looking for things about sadness. Like we're tuned to sadness, or we're tuned to scared or joyful or powerful. Like it's what we want to see or what we don't want to see because we're like aimed that direction. Now, this unlocks this wheel in a whole new way that I hadn't thought of before until we started recording this podcast.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was definitely a moment of extroverted intuition for you because that was that reframes me too to see it in a different way as well. Like there's like preferred states.
Yeah. My fear is there's like a ton of material about this. Somebody's already like written books about it. And like Joel stumbled on something that's like, it's got a whole discipline. Like Joel, it's state discipline. It's like a whole interstate family systems and you just don't know. I'm like, oh, I'm so stupid. Like that's my fear now that I've need something that's already been rehashed.
Calm your eternal child down. Because I say stuff all the time that probably has mountains of research on it. And I'm just like, I'm really smart for having come up with that. So feel free to pat yourself on the back if you want to. I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it. And if there is a ton of research on it, awesome. Somebody will let us know. I guarantee it. But that said, I'm also noticing that of those 6 core emotions, or as you're saying, states, which I think is a really interesting way of looking at that. Half of them are, I think, what we would code as quote unquote bad emotions or or the ones we don't like feeling as a general rule, like the ones that are, let's call them unpleasant, like the less pleasant emotions. And 3 of them are more pleasant emotions.
Yeah.
So the 3 that are less pleasant or unpleasant are sad, mad, and scared.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pleasant ones are joyful, powerful, and peaceful.
Yeah.
And of the 3 that are less pleasant, they also happen to be the primary emotions of the Enneagram, right? So you've got the gut triad, 8, 9, and 1, which is anger, right? Mad. You've got the heart triad of 2, 3, 4, which is grief, right? Or sad. And then you've got 5, 6, and 7, which is the head triad.
Yeah.
And that the core emotion there is fear. So you've got of the 3 core states or emotions, and that's probably part of how we are pre-wired to have a state. Is we all have an Enneagram type, and depending upon our Enneagram type, that's probably the emotion we have a tendency to find ourselves landing in, is my suspicion or guess, or the state rather.
Yeah.
So all of that said, of these 6, and pointing out that half of them are, pleasant and the other half are unpleasant. The assumption one would make is that of the pleasant, of the 3 emotions that are pleasant, why would any of them be unacceptable? Right? Why would you ever think that peacefulness is an unacceptable emotion? But I think I've been coaching for long enough to know, no, people absolutely will have an unacceptable emotion be one of the ones that we would say is pleasant or positive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a piece of it, is be on the lookout. If you think that you have to, like we said before, you don't have to have a narrative or story to feel good, right? Have you somehow wired it in your head that you have to have a good reason to feel good?
Yeah.
That you have to rationalize or explain or have a sufficient narrative to validate one of the more pleasurable emotions.
I don't know if people would see this as pleasurable, but I think we have a problem in the world, a challenge right now where people need to feel more powerful, and they keep resisting the feeling of power because they've been told it's wrong to feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like to direct power.
Mm-hmm.
So what they do is then they go like they'll become like a paperwork police. Like I don't want to step into an actual powerful leadership frame. So what I'll do is I'll go into my neighborhood, and those kids that aren't supposed to be skateboarding at that park, I'll know the code of the law of the county or the city we're in, and I'm going to use the law as my authority, and I'll wield that as a temporary or bastardized way of trying to feel powerful over these kids, because I'm refusing to step into an actual leadership role and take the responsibility that comes with. I'm avoiding feeling powerful, but I really do want to feel it. So now I'm doing it in a jacked up way. And I think this is writ large on our planet right now, is that as one category as an example.
Yeah,
right?
I would totally agree.
And
with
I
that.
don't think powerful is I think everybody wants to feel powerful over their, at least themselves, like empowered, right?
Yep.
And so it makes us feel weird. We're not supposed to. We've been told we're not supposed to feel these things too.
Yep. Yeah. So, why don't we talk about why they're all important?
Let's do it.
What they do for us. Would you want to start with power? We certainly can. Okay. So there's a lot of importance in feeling power, right?
Yes.
Like we need to feel it on a regular basis. We need to feel power, and we need to feel powerful. And we need to not let other people tell us that that's wrong and that we're trying to get away with something, or like anybody who seeks a feeling of power is somehow like automatically corrupt. I think that is a common contemporary message. And yet power does a lot for us. The first thing is that the feeling of power is, of course, associated with self-confidence.
Yeah.
Because if you feel like you have the power to affect your environment or the power to affect yourself, well, then you have a sense of confidence moving through the world, right? So power is a necessary feeling for self-confidence. It kind of makes sense why there's a lot of insecurity in the world these days, right? There's a lot of uncertainty and questions around whether or not I'm going to be okay, or why the word adulting even exists, right? It's like there's a withholding of our sense of our power, which allows us to experience self-confidence. And the other thing that comes along with it, or one of the other things that comes along with self-confidence, is a sense of self-efficacy, right? I'm good at what I do. I'm good at doing a thing. And we need to feel that. We need to feel a sense that we are competent and capable people in the world. There's also a sense of control that comes along with power, and not just like a sense of being controlling, which of course is the first place that a lot of people's minds jump to. Of course you want power because you want control. It's like, well, no, we need to feel a sense of control. If we feel like our entire lives are out of our control, then we start getting really anxious. We start to, we might even be self-sabotaging,
Yes.
right? Because we fear that we're not in control of anything and everything will spiral out.
Yeah.
And we might try to speed that process up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, what would we say if a hijacker came onto an airplane, they overpowered the cockpit and overpowered the pilots to take control of that plane? The pilot needs to be in power and not be overpowered, right? So it also is a defensive thing too. Like, you don't fight fire with, like, wood. You fight with fire. You need to be powerful so that you're also not exploited as well.
Yep.
And I think that's something that we forget. Like, that pilot needs to be in full power of that plane.
Yep.
That's his job or her job. They need to be doing that because that's important. And you don't want to be overpowered in that scenario. I mean, that's a dumb example, but to that point, we even say, oh, that person was overpowered. And we say that's bad in that scenario.
Yep, exactly. And then finally, a feeling of power is part of how we experience fulfillment.
Yeah.
And fulfillment comes through oftentimes a sense of achievement, right? Like, you've watched yourself show up strong in a situation. In fact, you were strong enough to achieve and accomplish and make progress in your life. And now you feel a sense of fulfillment. You feel good about that. And so a sense of power and all the associated emotions with it, things like, hopefulness comes under the auspice of power, and worthwhileness and valuableness comes under a sense of power.
I'd say responsibility comes under power,
Mhm.
because power is over something or resource. You're also now responsible for the thing you're over, right? You have to steward it and caretake it.
Yeah, and the way they've got it organized, and maybe this may or may not be true for everybody, but they've also got cheerful under the category of power, which I find to be a very interesting relationship.
Not under joyful.
I know.
It's under power.
It's under power. And I think it's because when you feel like you have power to affect change in your life, you feel a sense of cheerfulness. You're like, yeah, things are going to be okay. So there's a little bounce in your step. You're going to be all right. So power and a feeling of power is very important. So if power is one of your unacceptable emotions, you think you're a bad person if you're feeling it, well, you might be actually undermining yourself. You might be undermining your own sense of fulfillment.
Are you saying that disempowered people are not cheerful, Antonia?
I know, right?
I would have never guessed.
Shock. All right.
Okay. So let's head to peaceful. You started in the middle there with power. Or we started in the middle of power. We have the peaceful, joyful, and then we'll get to the more challenging ones. Let's do that.
Okay, so why is peacefulness so important to experience? Well, peacefulness leads to, it's actually a physically and mentally healthy emotion. It's important to feel. There is recovery that happens during relaxation.
Yeah.
So peace, which is a general sense of well-being, a general sense of, like, it's the opposite of vigilance. It's the opposite of having to be highly attuned and aware. It's a sense that you can rest, and that rest is recovery. And so peaceful, and sometimes people think a sense of peacefulness is unacceptable because it does require them to drop their guard. It means potentially feeling vulnerable because you're not vigilant for, what could be happening at any given moment.
Yeah.
But when you put yourself in that situation, now you're not allowing yourself to recover. You're not allowing yourself to rest, which will impact your physical health, right? Like, your body takes a hit when you will not allow yourself to experience peace.
Yeah.
And so because of that, what also comes along with peace is resilience. Now, resilience is the ability to experience difficult things in your life and bounce back, which I find very interesting, that resilience is more associated with peace than it does power. So you would think that, well, if I'm powerful, I'm resilient. But it's actually, if you're peaceful, you're resilient, because resilience comes on the back of recovery.
Yeah. Okay.
So peace is really important. And there are people who it's an unacceptable emotion, not because people don't like to feel it, but because they think they're not allowed to feel it.
Yeah.
They think they have to be constantly vigilant, especially if they grew up in a chaotic household, or a household that, anytime they let their guard down, something bad happened. So peace might be something that is a skill one has to build in the same way that power does, right? You have to rewire all the messaging. You have to, in the case of power, it's a lot of social messages against it. But in the case of peace, it might be a lot of experiences against it. It might be a lot of like moments when, like I said, you let your guard down and something happened to you. So you might have to do some rewiring to make it an acceptable emotion. But when you do, everything feels better. Everything, your mind, your heart, your body, everything feels like it's gonna like it's gonna be able to get to the next level or the next lily pad, I guess I could say.
So let's talk about joyfulness.
Okay. So joyfulness, you would think that people would understand why it's important to feel joy, but sometimes, again, people don't feel like it's an emotion they're allowed to have. And some people, it's an unacceptable emotion. Now, usually when things like joy and peace are unacceptable, oftentimes you're talking about, trauma-based reactions or responses, right? And it could even be trauma with capital T. So, there's a lot of things that are important about joy, and so if it is something that you find yourself resisting, then maybe this will help argue in its behalf.
I think joyful is an interesting emotion that is on this wheel. Well, again, I see this as a state. Am I seeing the word happy anywhere on any of this? I mean, I don't think there's no happy that comes from it. That's interesting that the word we have such a fixation and an addiction to the word happy and happiness. I don't see it anywhere here. I mean, I just be missing it, but I'm trying to look for anywhere, not under the category of joyfulness either.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of other qualitative words, but happiness is not one of them and happy is not one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I find that interesting.
Yeah.
So note that.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
What else do you have to say about joyfulness? Because I have a pattern I want to say about the three of these.
Okay. Yeah. So joy is important for a sense of satisfaction. To feel satisfied in life, one must allow for room for joyfulness. It's kind of like satisfaction is a deep feeling, and I would argue so is joy. There's a depth to it.
Yeah.
And so it's not just like you said, happy, which happy feels like a more shallow emotion.
Temporal.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say shallow. I think it could be deep. It just feels more temporal and less state-based.
Right.
I mean, I think joy is a state. Happiness is an emergent.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So satisfaction is required in order to really, joy is required for a sense of satisfaction, but also motivation. Like joy provides a lot of motivation for people, particularly when you're what's called toward motivated, meaning that you want things. And so you're motivated toward things. And joyfulness gives you that optimism to head towards things and be motivated to do things so that you can achieve and get and accomplish.
Yeah.
There's also physical and mental health reasons in the same way that peace is really cathartic. It's very, or not even cathartic. It's like it's like legit healing. The same thing with joy. Joy is also very healing. And then joy is also part of what helps us build connections with others. People are attracted to a sense of joy. And so joyfulness and a willingness to feel joy binds connections between people, which then creates more joy. And so it's like a generative state.
Compounding effect on that.
Yep.
So these are peaceful, powerful, and joyful do not feel like emotions or states that happen to us. These feel very proactive to me. I think people can have them randomly happen, but it doesn't feel like they just, I mean, when we're going to talk about it next, sad, mad, and scared, like you listening or watching right now probably felt one or all of those in the last 24 hours at some point. But did you feel peaceful, powerful, or joyful? It feels like you have to work harder and have more proactivity for those. So that's the first thing I would say. That's very interesting on that front. And then the other, and I think there's a pattern why that's the case is in order to feel peaceful, in order to feel powerful, and in order to feel joyful, you have to have an abundance of resource. In other words, not physical money or resource like tangible resource, but you have to feel resourced as a person. Like if you are tired or hungry or low energy or you just got in a fight with somebody, it's going to be hard to feel peaceful, powerful, and joyful. It feels like you don't have availability to those until you're more resourced. Yeah. And when we're not resourced, the others are very available to us.
Yeah.
Like they're available to us no matter if we have resource or not. And in fact, it's easier not to go to those other three when we're feeling resourced. So I feel like there's a resource line here. And again, when I say resource, I don't literally mean money in the bank, although it could be that. I mean feeling a sense of resourced in yourself. You're not being chased by the lion on the Serengeti, our ancestors thousands of years ago,
right.
they're going to feel scared in that environment. They're not going to feel peaceful.
Right.
They're under-resourced. They're literally steps from being dead if they don't run fast enough.
Right.
And so it's really hard to feel peaceful in that moment.
Yeah.
The moment the lion's gone and you know your life's not threatened, and you're in the cave later that night around the fire, well, now I can feel peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
I have abundance. I have abundance of safety. I'm in a cave. I'm safe. The weather's not getting me and the lion's not eating me. Yeah, I can totally feel peaceful. So I think those three require, or at least it's easier to get there with abundance. And my statement at the very beginning was, I don't think you have to have abundance for that, but I think that makes more sense, that it's hard to do it without abundance. For most people, most creatures on the planet have a hard time with those unless they feel the things are covered or taken care of.
Yeah. I think all emotions are an emergent of a system running.
Sure.
And I think the more pleasurable emotions require more maintenance to keep the systems going, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think resource it's easiest to develop a relationship to these more pleasant emotions, the more healing emotions.
Again, I don't see these as emotions. I see these as states. Like, I don't think you feel peaceful. I think you're in the state of peacefulness.
Or state, however you want to say it.
And I think it's a little bit of a difference. I know I'm squabbling here, but I think that's what's coming up for me is it's very much a state of being, like attunement, than it is a feeling I'm experiencing.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
And then all the feelings are below that. Like, that's what I experience, but I'm in the state of peacefulness. I'm in the state of joyfulness.
Yeah.
And I think that is choosable outside of that resource.
Mm-hmm.
But that's hard to do because it's not as obvious. It takes training and discipline and practice.
Yes, I do think I think we undervalue how many things are skills to build.
Yeah.
Like I think a lot of stuff we just believe are automatically given to us, when really they're actually skills we need to build and develop. And I think states, I'm gonna adopt your vernacular because I mean it sounds right to me. States are skills.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And to both feel them fully, process them, and navigate through them. I think there's a methodology oftentimes.
So let's talk about the sad, mad, and scared states and the emotions and feelings that derive from them.
So let's go to scared. So what's the purpose of scared? Why would we need to feel it?
Well, if a lion's chasing you,
got it.
thousands of years ago, it's probably more useful for humans in the past than it is now. It's a biological. Mm-hmm. That's the other thing. These three seem tied to survival and biology. The others are more toward abundance and social cohesion and connection. It's more forward facing. These are more like away from sort of things.
Yeah. Well, that's their purpose. Their purpose is to protect.
Yeah.
Right. The other ones, you could say their purpose is to heal or to make us
further.
That's right. To move forward, and this is to catch up. Right.
Yeah.
And to protect us from making sure that we don't have something bad happen, which is why scared is so important. So the purpose of scared is protection and self-protection. If you don't feel sufficient fear or one of the offshoots of anxiety, then yes, maybe it was more viscerally appropriate in times past when it was much more likely for us to be in physical danger. But there are still people who are in extreme physical danger now.
Of course.
Right. We still have physical threats all over.
Yeah.
And we have existential threats, and we have, like our own personal philosophical threats, or like personal experience threats. If you don't care about losing your job, you may or may not show up and perform well.
Yeah.
And if you don't perform well, then you're more likely to lose your job. And now you're in a bad financial way, and your survival is on the line now. So fear and anxiety are important to make sure that you are being vigilant. Unlike peace, which is like turn the vigilance off, scared goes no, turn the vigilance on, because there are some certain contexts and situations where it's very important to feel that.
The challenge is our soma doesn't always know that. Mm-hmm. Our body and our energy system doesn't know the difference between being on a stage and giving a talk and being tied up to be burned at the stake in front of the same group of people. Like, there's a crowd of people all looking at me. Oh God, something's wrong, right? Like we don't have a lot of nuance to that processing in our ancient wiring and things. So we have to be proactive. And that's why we can't succumb to some of these fears and the scared framework or state. We don't want to keep protecting and backing away from that. We actually want to put ourselves in places to get on the stage to give the talk, to go, oh, I'm not being actually burned at the stake or being attacked by these villagers. These villagers are looking at me and I'm actually delivering value. My system doesn't know that, but I'm hanging here long enough. Okay, nothing's bad happening. I feel okay. All right, I don't have to actually be scared about this.
Yeah.
And now you can grow yourself and train and basically practice this.
Mm-hmm.
But if you keep never doing that, then anytime you're on that stage, your system's going to think you're getting burned at the stake.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think what I'm hearing you say is if you refuse to feel fear and anxiety, then it's now you have confined yourself to a very small world with small opportunities and small circumstances. So if you're willing to feel fear or anxiety or any of the associated emotions that go along with it, then you can overcome it. You can start calibrating to what actually does need fear.
Yeah.
Right. Like what is an appropriate moment of fear? Now, if you're scared, you're scared. So any moment of fear is quote unquote an appropriate moment of fear. But if you never allow yourself to feel it, or if you run away from all those experiences, it was only appropriate because I guess appropriate, maybe the word is valid. It's all valid, right? Like you're feeling it, so it's true and it's valid. But if you never allow yourself to expand outside of it, then now it might be inappropriate. Now you're bringing in other people on your fears, and now you are limiting yourself and others in your ecosystem because of your fears and anxieties. So we talked about before, whose problem or responsibility is it? Well, if you're unwilling to feel it, or if you, or in the case, the 180 degrees is you're always feeling it in order to motivate yourself to do things. And now you're sort of burning it out, right? Then maybe that's something that you need to calibrate inside of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about MAD.
Okay.
So MAD, why do we have this state? What does MAD do for us?
So MAD is really important for justice. MAD usually flares up when our justice triggers flare up. And so MAD is important for righting wrongs. It's important for boundary setting and making sure people don't do things to you that they have no right to do, that they don't exploit or take advantage of you. It's important to be motivated to right wrongs, usually to help other people right the wrongs they've done against you or other people. But it's really about, it's trying to set things straight, right? And so MAD is important to register for when people have taken actions that they didn't have a right to, when they harmed things that were not, like that was not their place to take that action or to do that thing. And so now something is broken. Now something is harmed because of their action.
Yeah.
And so MAD or anger is what gives us almost like a fuel, a righteous fuel to ensure that we are not putting ourselves in danger by succumbing, right? By like rolling over and exposing our underbelly and just going, I guess the world can do whatever it wants to us.
Yeah.
It gives us a sense of enough is enough, or you don't have the right, or you're not allowed to do that to me.
Yeah.
It also it reminds us of the importance of respect as well. Like people need to show respect to each other. And when they don't, then usually we're frustrated or irritated or angry. And it's because we're trying to right that wrong, right? There's like a social component to it as well.
Yeah. Okay. And let's talk about SAD.
Okay. So SAD is hard for people to feel. Now, MAD is hard for people to feel because they feel out of control, by the way. One of the reasons why people avoid anger is because it makes them feel that they're out of control.
Not me, man. I feel more in control of anger.
On the flip side, for others, they love the feeling of anger because it makes them feel powerful.
Yes.
Right. Now, it's a synthetic drug.
Yeah. It's
not actual power.
Yeah.
But it makes you feel powerful. And it is a check engine light towards looking at a boundary across. But some people find that this is an unacceptable emotion because it turns their brains off sometimes, or it makes them feel like they're going to do something they'll regret later.
Yeah.
It makes them feel like they are being jerked around by other people, or they're in reaction to them.
Yeah.
And so I can appreciate and understand, or it's just scary.
Yeah.
Anger can be scary. It can be an unacceptable emotion to somebody because they don't know what another person who's angry is going to do.
Of course.
Right? Because it gives you that feeling of...
Feels unpredictable for a lot of folks.
That's right. Unpredictable and scary, and that synthetic power. So I can appreciate why it would be considered unacceptable. and it's also important.
Yeah.
Right. And you don't get one, by the way, you don't get one without the other. Like if you don't process anger, or if you won't allow yourself to feel mad or angry, it's unacceptable. It's not like you get to not feel all the things that are scary about it, but get the benefits of, setting boundaries.
Yeah.
Like if you don't feel mad or anger, you don't get boundaries.
Yep.
Like they come hand in hand. Okay.
Let's talk about sad though.
Let's go to sad. So sadness is really important, and we didn't talk about this with fear and anxiety, but there's like a time component to these. So fear and anxiety is always about the future, because you're anticipating and responding and sort of tensing up for something that hasn't happened yet. So it's an attempt to avoid.
Vigilance.
Right. Exactly. Anger and mad is generally about right now. Now, it's like it might be something that happened before, but you just heard about it right now. So mad and anger is an in the moment experience as a general rule. Whereas sadness and grief, they're about the past. They're about something that has already happened. And so sometimes people don't want to experience grief because they don't want to have to experience the acceptance that comes along with grief, which is, I can't do anything about that. Now, there's acceptance of, I accept that it happened. I fully processed my grief around it, and I feel complete in my acceptance. There's that. And then there's the, I don't want to think about it. I can't do anything about it. So I accept it in the sense that there's no action that can be taken because I don't have a time machine to change it. But that's not actual acceptance. So sadness and grief give us capacity to truly accept things and to let them go.
Yeah.
Right. To like open our hand and kind of allow that thing to no longer be something that you're holding on to tightly. And there are tons of benefits to grief, to like the grief that one needs to feel, like to process the thing that's already in there. There's catharsis that comes along with it, right? There's like a relief experience that comes along with sadness. There is the ability to process loss, right? Which is what we're talking about. Grief is basically processing loss, and 100% of people experience loss. So 100% of people have grief they have to process.
Yeah.
There is an ability to experience life with more depth through sadness. Sadness gives us a sense of depth of experience. It tells us how important things were to us. And so without grief, you don't really fully feel how important things are to you.
Yeah.
You don't feel the full weight of them. You almost shirk some responsibility if you won't feel it, because you won't acknowledge what it really means to you.
Brings me gratitude. Like I can be grateful for things. When I lose something, it's like you don't know what you missed until it's gone kind of feeling. Mm-hmm. It's like sadness tunes us into that. Like, wow, I didn't even know how good I had it till this is no longer in my life, or I've lost this.
Yep.
And tuning into the grief, when you talk about specific expression of being sad, the state of sadness toward grief, because there's other places it can be applied. That's a channel I think we can often experience it.
Yep.
It says, I was pretty grateful to have that. I didn't realize I should have maybe been more grateful because now it's gone. And now I'll be watching for other things I'm taking for granted too.
You got it. Yes, absolutely. And as far as most people experience grief and sadness with tears. And I want to make a note on tears that crying, the act of crying through grief and sadness, there's a detoxification that happens with tears. There's like this studies done that there's like this, like a cocktail of chemicals that gets released. I think primarily cortisol, like the stress hormone, gets released through tears. I think that there's at least one, possibly more, but I know there's like one form of endorphin that gets released.
Yeah.
So you're releasing cortisol, but at the same time, you're also calling upon an endorphin inside of you. So it gives you almost like a sense of like it's a mood enhancer.
Yeah.
Crying is a mood enhancer.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes people, they don't know that technically or clinically, they just know that experientially. So they end up doing a lot of weeping and crying as almost like a mood modification tool. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that. I'm just saying if there's tears in there that need to be released, do it.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're actually, it's very cleansing to cry.
Yeah.
So all of these are important emotions. None of them should be considered unacceptable. And I think what's nice about, or states, and what's nice about the feel wheel is that it helps us trace back, like if we're feeling something we don't like to feel,
Yeah.
we might be able to trace it back to a state that we need to experience.
Yes.
We need to give ourselves permission to be in that state so we get the benefits of it, that we're not avoiding some of the gifts. Well, we're avoiding the state or the emotion, but that means we're also avoiding the gifts they have to offer.
Now, the feel wheel we're looking at, this is by Gloria Wilcox. This has a dichotomous nature to these.
Mm-hmm.
So if you notice, sad is opposite of joyful, mad is opposite of powerful, peaceful is opposite of scared.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately I pattern this to go, if I'm feeling sad, I probably really want to, like, of course, I might need to process emotion or whatever, but there's all sorts of characteristics here. Like grief is just one of the channels that's possible there. The other one is like, what, depressed or ashamed or guilty. I'm not sure we have to sit in guilt, for example. Like grief might be good, but guilt, I don't know. There might be something I need to feel guilty about, but sitting there and wallowing in that, really what I'm seeing is when I feel some emotions in that whole realm of sad, I'm like, well, the opposite of the dichotomy is the joyful side, right? And this is really easy to see in mad and power. And you kind of already hinted to this. When I'm angry, my boundaries have been crossed, meaning I don't feel powerful. And I need to take power in the situation and create a better boundary. And the moment I do that, I'll feel better. I won't feel so angry. So in a way, we could see these emotions like mad, sad, and scared as pointing to what is needed. What state is needed? If I'm angry with you, Antonia, and there's boundary cross or something going on with that, it's like, I need to be in the state of powerfulness. I need to get into the state of power because I must feel disempowered. Otherwise, I wouldn't be angry right now. And when we cross somebody's boundary, they do feel disempowered. The boundary was not enforced. There was no enforcement, right? They feel encroached upon. And they feel, oh, I don't feel powerful enough to stop the encroachment. I'm angry about that. And you get the emotion up, but you're attempting to get into a state of powerfulness over your realm, over your sovereignty, over whatever the boundaries,
Right.
whether emotional, logistic, whatever the actual subject matter is. That's really interesting. That these are kind of levers of each other. And when I said earlier, these states are more proactive, peaceful, powerful, joyful. That's also interesting because that gives us a little bit of a roadmap. If I don't like being angry all the time, I have anger management issues. Let's say I'm a person that feels that way. Well, if I could practice being in the state of powerfulness, well, then probably I won't feel angry all the time.
Right.
If I can develop that and be in that state of being, I'm probably going to be a lot less angry.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm actually after is the state of power.
Yeah.
And I think that gives us a roadmap of what to do. And these then become not emotions we sit in. They are useful, but they're useful to point to something. And it looks like more skill has to be put into the peaceful, powerful, and joyful frame.
Yeah.
We have to do something proactive and we have to develop it and stay and nurture that.
Yeah.
And these are almost indicators that we're off track.
Well, I would say there's sometimes we're feeling something or stuck in it because we're avoiding it, and sometimes it's because we are overusing it.
Sure.
So take, for example, sadness and joy. Do I need to experience sadness? Is some of the offshoots, like you said, guilt? It's like, is guilt actually pointing to grief that I need to process? Sadness. So like, do I need to experience some of these things? Or am I feeling this way because actually I need more joy in my life? So am I over or under doing it? And I think that's what's great about all of this is that it gives us, like you said, a roadmap of, to some extent, some calibration too.
Yeah.
Like if I'm avoiding sadness, it will be haunting me. But if I don't have a lot of sadness, like I've processed my grief and sadness, but I just can't find I can't find my way out of it, then maybe it's joy that I need to be building the skill around.
And the other thing is it's cross-channel. That's the other thing too. Sorry, just coming up for me. I just got to say this before I lose the thought. It's very tenuous. I have anxiety. We've talked about this. And I've noticed that when I just go, you know what? I'm just going to trust it's going to be fine. And I like really I do some breath work. I release the emotion. I try to disconnect from the anxiety. I do feel really peaceful. I feel calm and I get nothing done. I'm legitimately like I get nothing done. Like, because I feel so peaceful. There's no reason to act. I don't feel the anxiety that normally fuels me. So then I'm like, oh shoot, that deadline is going to really come. So then what I have to do is that the solution wasn't on that channel.
No.
I didn't want to feel anxious.
Right.
I practiced the state of peacefulness.
Right.
But then I need to click over into power to get something done.
Or
the
joy.
state of power or the state of joy to be
motivated.
Yeah. So it might be that we just stay on the same channel, but the solution is to click over into a different state And that gets us what we actually needed.
Yeah.
But if we stay on the channel, we'll never solve it, because the solution for me is not just to get rid of anxiety and now feel peaceful.
Yep.
That doesn't actually solve the problem.
Yep.
It temporarily solves the problem between you and me. It solves half the equation.
Right.
Now you're not triggered by my anxiety, but also, like, we might go out of business if I don't do something.
Right.
If I just feel peaceful, oh, kumbaya, I'll just like meditate. I feel super peaceful and super grounded. Well, we won't have a business or a house or a life after a while.
Right.
So I've got to click into something else to get motivated then.
Yeah.
And I think that also says, so for you, for grief, you're stuck in grief a lot, let's say, as you, Antonia, and you get into joyfulness. Well, now you don't feel grief, right? And what was grief doing for you, I guess? Like you probably had some utility or something in a similar way. Which channel would you click to try to get to solve what grief was trying to do for you when it was inappropriate? Not when it's appropriate grief, but inappropriate grief.
Yeah, I think actually peace is probably something, and that's probably when I'm avoiding anxiety.
Yeah.
It means I'm probably also avoiding peace.
Well, it's interesting that peace is right next to sad, and scared is right next to joyful.
You got it. And for you,
right?
You're usually avoiding sadness,
Yes.
and joyfulness is on the other side of it.
Yeah.
So that's a very interesting. I mean, this is happening in real time. We're talking about it in real time. We're just noticing this pattern, and maybe this pattern was written. I mean, maybe that's the intent of
that's
the
my
wheel.
fear that I'm just late to the party. It was like, yeah, Joel, read the book. You would have known this.
Yeah,
you dummy. And I'm like,
guess
I'm feel bad about myself.
We'll keep it in our head better if we figure it out on our own anyway. So anyway, the point of
I don't have an ego about it. It's fine.
That's right.
If I'm dumb, it's cool.
To go back to the point of origin.
Dumb is not an emotion.
Dumb is not a state.
Well, stupid is. Stupid is sad. And intelligent is power.
There you go.
There you go.
So
sorry, I derailed you. Continue.
Go back to. I'm starting to think we need to wrap this up. I'm starting to think it's going late.
Let's go ahead and bring this together.
So to go back to the point of origin. Do you have an unacceptable emotion?
Mm-hmm.
And it might be something you have to figure out. You might have to watch yourself be avoidant of a certain state or a different emotion or feeling.
Yeah.
And for us, it's a little easier to source it, or it's easier to source it because we just have to look at our Enneagram and our Myers-Briggs types. What is the dynamic going on there?
Yeah.
So if you do know your Enneagram type or your Myers-Briggs type, there might be some clues there that are pointing to what you're avoiding and why you're avoiding it and how you're avoiding it.
Yeah.
But that said, I think it is worthy of spending some introspective time to go, what's going on here? And am I missing the rewards of the emotions I'm trying to avoid? And then, as you just pointed out, am I missing the reward of the other side of it as well?
Yeah. Well, what do you think as you've been listening and watching along? Have you tuned into a feel wheel for yourself? We have a lot of people in our courses, and I know thinkers often will bring these as tools to events and workshops and coaching frameworks, because this is so useful to kind of get a sense of what they're feeling and what they're experiencing.
Well, it's something that we reference to in our Unleashed, our INTJ and INTP program called Unleashed.
Yeah.
We talk about the feel wheel.
Yeah. Yeah, we do that. We also map social networks for introverts that are thinkers as well in that program. You're right. This feel wheel does go deep into some of the emotions that people of those two types might be feeling. I think it's a useful tool. And I think that it's really cool to, again, I was being somewhat facetious. I'm like, this is too simple, but I think it's a very neat way to kind of get a sense of where you're at. So what's happening for you as you tune into this? Are the same themes coming up for you? Have you been able to use some of these concepts? Do you have an emotion that's unacceptable? Like Antonia and I have been talking about this. You're the third person in this conversation, but you haven't had a microphone. So now's your turn to come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question, but more importantly, share your story. Stories are so important. They're compressed experiences. Just like I started this episode off with a story about Jonathan and his son, what is a dynamic or a story you've seen with emotion? Do you have an example you could share with us of how this plays out in real life? That'd be interesting. Personalhacker.com. Come over and make your voice heard.
That's right. And if you enjoyed the podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. I keep asking for people to leave a rating review, but I guess people just don't do that anymore. I know we have the same numbers as we have before.
People are busy.
Like Antonia Dodge, self-validate.
They got stuff to do.
You don't need my review. I do. Well, I want it. I might not need it. I guess I'm going to do this no matter what, but I appreciate it. So if you would like to make my heart happy, if you'd like me to feel joy and not sad,
Yeah.
Go leave a rating review on iTunes. It helps me out emotionally. And of course, you could be watching this on YouTube because we have a video podcast, which you should be watching us on YouTube. So go like, subscribe, and hit the bell for future episodes. And actually, our Unleashed program is great. I hadn't even thought about it until you mentioned that there are some introverts that are also thinkers that come with feel wheels. And I'm like, that's probably because that's part of the program. I highly recommend going and checking out the Unleashed program. It's specifically designed for INTJs and INTPs to be able to deal with, overcoming some social anxiety, figuring out your life purpose. There's a great interview series with INTJs and INTPs that have figured some really awesome stuff out. So go check that out. And if you happen to have INFJ or INFP preferences, we also have a program for you called Empowered. Yeah. So the feel wheel is not in that one, but there's some great material around emotional regulation and full emotional processing. Yeah. And also an interview series with INFPs and INFJs. So either Unleashed or Empowered, both of those are fabulous programs.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.